Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Implementing Effective Data Governance, a Practical Guide. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A section. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link to the recording of this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority, an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of Data International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his 13 books are many firsts. Starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter has founded several organizations that have helped more than 200 organizations leverage data. Specific savings have been measured at more than 1.5 billion US dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Peter, hello and welcome.
And hello to you, Shannon, and to everybody else online. It's great to be with you. Just jump right into the program. I've got a jam-packed agenda as usual here. We're going to start looking at data's confounding characteristics and then move on to 4 aspects of your data governance program that you really do need to be focusing on in order to make it successful. The first one is keeping it practically focused on strategy. This is the first primary way that you'll be able to keep people's attention to it. Second is to understand that data governance must exist at the same level as HR in your organizations. And I say HR, it's finance as other things in that it's a programmatic exercise. Third, start simple and add ingredients. Just like a good cook, you don't change everything at once, but you add things gradually when you know what is working. And finally, the importance of storytelling in all of that. About an hour from now, we'll come back to the top and start talking specifically about some Q&A that we'll get into on here. But let's just jump right in to the data's confounding characteristics. And we'll start off with an admission from all of us data people that data is not broadly or widely understood, just as the blind people that are approaching an elephant, touching different parts of the elephant seems to look at the elephant as a wall, or it's a fan, or it's a snake, depending on what they touch. And data is exactly the same way. Many people approach data from different perspectives. But to sum it up in a fairly easy way, IT has in the past thought that data is a business problem, and their attitude has been, if they can connect to the server, then my job is essentially done. On the other hand, the business looks at somebody with a title, Chief Information Officer, and thinks that IT is managing the data. After all, who else would be taking care of it? And as a result, data has fallen into this giant chasm between business and IT. It's up to us as data governance professionals to try and repair that and to put things in place. A first lesson to understand then about data is understanding, very much like the Princess on the Pea story, that if you recall the story, there's a pea down here at the bottom of these 20 mattresses, and as a result, the princess is sleepless because she's uncomfortable and failing to understand the role of governance within proposed and existing services locks in these imperfections for the life of the application. Just as the pea at the bottom of the bed creates a sleepless situation for the princess, it restricts the value of future investments and decreases the organization's ability to leverage data, which last time I looked, that was something every company was trying to do better. It also accounts for a large percentage of IT budgets. 20 to 40% of your IT budget is devoted to migrating, converting, or improving data. That's an awful lot of money. So lack of data governance causes everything to take longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk. Thank you to Tom Marco for those wonderful words around that. Now, I mentioned in the abstract that I've been incorporating more and more artificial intelligence techniques in here. I tend to use Gemini. This is not an advertisement for it. Our university buys us copies of either Gemini and ChatGPT. I like Gemini for a number of reasons we can talk about after the broadcast here. But for example, if I ask the question of Gemini, provide examples of how poor data governance causes everything else to cost more, deliver less, take longer, and present greater risk, this is the response that it brings back to us. I'm not going to walk through these. Remember, you get the slides, so you can look and read these at your leisure on this. And as always, if you want the actual slides, just please feel free to reach out directly to me and I'll do it. But it gives very good information in there. And if we ask an even more specific question, provide examples of how poor data governance causes everything at Walmart, just to pick one of the many fine companies that I've worked with on an ongoing basis here. It actually says, well, I don't really know much about Walmart, but actually it does. And it gives us, once again, lots and lots of good information. So try this with your own organization. Provide examples of how poor data governance is causing everything at your company to cost more, deliver less, take longer, and present. You get the picture here, right? It very likely knows some things about your company, just as it knows some things about Walmart here. One of the things we have to be careful of course, is the understanding that when we're looking at data governance from a general perspective, we've got to consider the idea that many people don't intuitively say that well-organized data is worth more. Well, here's a very quick example from a colleague here. If you think about it, when we have books, we don't just hand people the pages of the book and assume that the pages are going to be presented in the right order. They're in number, their table of contents is there. They have indices. There's all sorts of things. This is from a wonderful set of resources by a woman named Abby Covert, who's written a great book here, How to Make Sense Out of Any Mess on this. Because of course, if we take away these organizing structures, the data becomes very ephemeral very quickly and starts to disappear. So well-organized data is in fact worth more. And again, 80% of your data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. People think I'm crazy when I walk into their organization and start saying that you have too much data rot or too much data debt, but it's true that 80% of all organizational data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And the question is, which one is going to be eliminated? And more importantly, who is better qualified to accomplish this kind of weeding out process? So once again, I'm going to jump back over here to Gemini and say, how do I go about identifying data rot? Well, once again, Gemini provides a lot of good information in all of these areas. Once again, I'm not going to go through them, but you can see it's establish metrics and monitoring, look for specific signs and symptoms, implement governance practices, leverage tools and techniques, and foster a data-driven culture. Again, picking on Walmart here, not that they're bad or anything at all. How do I go about identifying data at Walmart? It has some very specific and useful examples here. I'm not saying this to look at Walmart. That's not the example you should look, but you should look at it in your own organization and find out what are the things that the AI can help you do. It is extremely useful given this. This is really the summation of what's happening here. There's bad data practices have led to much data debt, which means that you have to go back and sort of return your data to normal state before you can actually start to do the exploitation state on it. And it requires new skills because not everybody understands the data debt that's in there. It's not like it's a hoarder. Everybody understands hoarding, but once again, data debt slows progress, decreases quality, increases costs, and presents greater risk. So where do I look in my organization for data debt? Well, again, Gemini does a wonderful job of looking for all of these pieces. This is some of the best information I've gotten out of artificial intelligence adjuncts in order to do this. But I'm going to slow down here just a little bit and tell you a story that as a professor, I am responsible at VCU, my university, Virginia Commonwealth University, where I've been very happily employed for 32 years. They want me to be absolutely familiar with 261 individual policies. Of course, that's an impossible situation, simply not going to happen. under any circumstances. So I fed all of these into a related AI. This is something called notebooklm.google.com. And I get this type of thing here. These are policies. And more importantly, I can click over here on this audio button.
All right, let's be real for a sec.
Okay.
Nobody, and I mean nobody,
Mhm.
actually looks forward to spending their precious weekend
Right.
buried in a stack of university policies,
Nice.
like trying to find like a really exciting, you know,
Yeah.
thriller novel in the library rule book section,
That's
right?
that.
Who does that?
Nobody.
But that's why we're here.
That's right.
We're here.
So it makes a fantastic little session of audiobooks. And you can transform this and say, okay, don't give me just a little podcast about, it's clearly NPR styled, 2 voices, they're extremely chatty. And you can actually say, focus the attention on a specific thing with its animals around university property. And it will either summarize that piece for you, or you can ask it to point out inconsistencies between the policy. It is a absolutely fabulous way of doing this. My point here is not that you as data governance professionals are going to be learning about university policies. Please, I'll spare you any of that that's in there, but it is something that you can use to add in things that are relevant to your data governance efforts and help people become familiar with them via the audio interface, but also ask them questions about this. I'll tell you a quick little story here. I loaded the manuals and information about my new Prius that I bought last year into it because I was trying to figure out where I could go to figure out where the tire pressure was. And the thing said very quickly, open the driver's side door and read the little panel that's there, idiot. But again, it was good information on all of this. So we've talked a little bit about these topics here. What we really want to do is come back as data governance professionals and say, it's wrong to ask the question, how should we govern all this data? It's not possible, it's not worthwhile, it's not productive. But instead, the right question is, should we include this data item within the scope of our current data governance practices? That is the correct question. And it's hard to get people to understand the difference between there. But remember, 80% of your data is rot. Regardless of the decision, make absolutely certain that you document why that is the case in order to do these things. All right, so let's look into this a little bit more closely and dive in and talk about strategy. First of all, how old is your profession? Right, very reasonable question. And we have literally, this is a cuneiform record of beer sales from 8,000 years ago. So we've been doing beer sales and accounting for them for at least 8,000 years, which means that the accounting profession has had the time to develop something called generally accepted accounting principles. And these are wonderful. We're a little bit less mature. I take our origin of our profession back to really the 1850s or so, when a wonderful person named Ada Augusta King looked at a weaving loom and said, oh my goodness, when they make a machine that will properly do these things, I'll be able to make it do mathematics. Again, wonderful, wonderful piece that she's been able to do this. She's really the founder of our discipline in all of these areas, but it's not well known as far as that goes. So what's been working or not working on this? And the answer is, well, we haven't done so great. So these numbers that I'm going to show you right here, first of all, are from a wonderful survey that our colleague Randy Bean has done. The reference is right here. It's a live reference, so when you get the slides, you can just click on it. But in 2023 here, you can see he asked the question, are you driving innovation with data? And the reason I started with 2023 is because that was the first year we ended up with over half of the companies self-reporting that they were doing this. However, if they were competing on data and analytics, it was 41%, 40%, 24%, and 1 in 5 forging a data-driven culture in 2023. We're now going to move to the 2024 numbers, which are bigger. And I was quite skeptical of these numbers when they came out. You can see they increased at a big piece, but let's go on to the 2025 numbers. And sure enough, we did in fact get a little bit of a retrenchment here, where many people thought this was a great idea, but it was actually quite overestimated here. So you can still see that most companies are not doing things that they'd like to be doing. But here's the part I found from all of these surveys that was most important. He asked the question each year, are the challenges that you face around data and data governance in particular primarily technology oriented, or are they people and process oriented? And the first year is 2018. It was 80-20. Guess what? The numbers have been very consistent. The problems in data are much largely, boy, that's great. Sorry, much larger people and process problems than they are, in fact, technology problems. And if you ask your question, who in your organization, what group do you have in your organization that can help with data-focused people and process problem? Data governance is the only answer for this. So very important to keep this in mind. Of course, if you have trouble selling governance, it's pretty easy to go back and say, look, there's always been corporate governance. We need to make sure that this happens as a process in there. And that as a result, we've also had IT governance, which makes sure that IT is aligned with business strategy, providing measurable results, key metrics, and specific foci in here. So then we get to data governance. These are sort of the 7 standard definitions for data governance. I'll tell you, I don't like any of them. It's just not a really good idea. If you get on an elevator with an executive and they say, what are you doing with data governance? And you say, I'm managing data with guidance, they will understand what it is you're talking about. Next question immediately pops up. Would you want your sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset managed without guidance? And the answer is absolutely not. Now, I change this definition just slightly when I'm talking to executives. Data governance is really managing data decisions with guidance. And I think this has been a failure up to this point because many people talk about just managing the data, but so often the decisions involved in this are critical as well. And these are a way of drawing in your peers in these areas to also look at what's going on here. So let's just take a quick look on this. Again, what you're seeing here is that bad data, many companies report using inaccurate data for big decisions, not a good idea. We can take it even a step further. 48% of companies reported made bad decisions. This leads to something that I call the bad data decision spiral. This is the idea, of course, that business decision makers are not data knowledgeable as technical decision makers are similarly not data knowledgeable, leading to bad data decisions. Those bad data decisions result in poor data asset treatment and poor data quality, and both of those lead to poor outcomes from an organizational perspective. And the question is, how do we break out of this cycle? Give you
This is wrong.
My favorite example. Thank you, Morgan Freeman. I love it when he says that. I sampled him, if you will, on that. But right now, Salesforce has a big challenge around this, which is that people install Salesforce, which is very fine software, but they install it as an IT project, which means it's got to be in by, let's just say June 10th. And the idea of putting it in June 10th means that oftentimes things get compressed in the schedule. And when it does, it results in Salesforce, good quality software, being filled with bad quality data. And that's an absurd proposition. It means that Salesforce is often tarred with a brush that says Salesforce isn't any good. Well, Salesforce is in fact good, but if it's filled with bad quality data, it's not appropriate. This is some of the most important things that data governance can do, is to say, look, if you're taking data from one system to the next, you need to put in place practices and controls to make sure that the data in the target system is of at least demonstrably better quality than the data in the source system. If not, why would you move it in the first place? When we look at what's going on, what are some of the bad decisions made by Walmart? Once again, it's coming back and saying, I can't talk about Walmart in particular, but it's looking at typical things that have occurred across the industry. So once again, you can look at your own organization and say, what are some bad decisions that have been bad data decisions that have been made by your specific organization, and start to work on them. This leads to sort of 3 key data governance questions. Is the quality of the data in the new system, the new place, the cloud, forecast to be better quality in the old one? Lift and shift does not improve data quality and typically reduces the quality. Are we able to formulate plans to obtain significant new value from the data in the system? If not, if we're just moving it to place A to place B because somebody thinks it ought to be in one place and should be in another, that's not a good idea as well. And does it afford us an opportunity to consolidate data and data types? So these are really good questions to look at as we're working through these particular pieces. And one of the places that's been very problematic has been the airline industry. These were an article from the pandemic where United and American Airlines were valued at 6 billion and 9 billion respectively on this. And yet the data in their systems from the frequent flyer programs was valued at 30 billion and 22 billion, much, much larger in this case than the actual value of the airlines. You better believe that the airline executives were trying as hard as they could to figure out how to make leverage of this. And some of them were more successful than others, but it was clearly something that structurally is not practical in there. And once again, that's the question. How much data value is locked inside of frequent flyer programs, and why is it so hard for them to realize it? And again, came up with some really, really good examples. I'm pretty sure the airlines probably paid several $1,000,000 to get similar kinds of advice, whereas now you can see the AI has all of this data in it for you to get access to. So let's look at how we should take a step back on this. How do we determine in this? Well, first of all, is to realize that all organizations are data machines, and all the inputs are data and all the outputs are data. And the question is, from a governance perspective, how much should we manage formally? If we manage too much of it formally, it becomes, as it says on the left there, too expensive and slow from a bureaucracy perspective. If we have too little, we miss opportunities that are there. So the key to determining value is interoperability. If you look at what interoperability is focused on, it helps you understand the data value that is there. Over time, we of course want to change the data from known to unknown, from unknown to known. Most data in most organizations is of unknown characteristics, and we want to change those to known characteristics. And still further time, we also want to shrink the volume of the data so that the known proportion becomes greater than the unknown proportion, eventually ending up with a situation that is a much happier situation rather than unknown. Again, I won't take a poll here, but I do it when we're in person. Ask the question, how many of you, your organizations can say that all of the data in our organization is of unknown quality? That's a very, very challenging, very, very important question that you don't want to ask in public. So I mentioned before, it's be focused on strategy. The idea of strategy, we didn't used to use the term before about 1950 when the management consultants got a hold of it, and you can see increased it in a way that made it come up with this idea of it's a master plan and all sorts of things that are in there. But that really makes strategy a thing. And I like to go back to the original term, which is used in the military, a pattern in a stream of decisions. And that means that strategy is much more of a process than it is a thing. Let me give you a couple of examples. Again, I've been picking on Walmart here. Well, everybody knows that Walmart's business strategy was for a while everyday low price. Every associate, every customer, every supplier understood this. And when you made a decision at Walmart, you made a decision that was focused on making sure that it was in line with strategy of everyday low price. Similarly, Wayne Gretzky as soccer ice hockey great. His strategy was very straightforward. He skates to where he thinks the puck will be. If you are chasing the puck around on the ice, you will never be successful in ice hockey. He has a wonderful Wikipedia article on this where he expounds on this in great detail in conversations between himself and his father. Also, if we are looking at a military context, if we are the good guys on the left side and the bad guys on the right side, we're going to have a different strategy if we're up here and they're down here than we will if they are up here and we're down there. So all of these strategies have to be something that we can use in very simplistic terms. Pattern in a stream of decision, and most importantly, strategy is what guides work group activities. So this is a primary motivator for your knowledge worker staff in your organizations. Now, I call this a complex data environment because this is the one that the Commonwealth of Virginia has been attempting to implement here. We've done this 3 separate times. This is our 3rd time to go after data governance on this. And I just want you to imagine that you're the governor of the state of Virginia and looking at this and saying, where do I fit in, right? Well, there's somebody that advises the customer, the governor, but trying to figure out the difference between the data commission and the data governance council and the executive data board is much more than an elevator conversation in here. So your data strategy should be the highest level of guidance that's available, focusing on data activities in a business goal achievement and providing guidance when faced with a stream of uncertainty, most successfully articulating how data can be best used to support the organization, and usually involving remediation and proactive types of activities focused on what we call the lighthouse metaphor. That is, that there are things out there that will help further your organizational strategy. There's some amount of overlap between opportunities to improve data's use by the business and the ability to increase data skills. And a really nice sweet spot, if you will, is when you can have all three of these merged into one particular organization. Again, why is data governance organizational strategy such an important driver for this? Well, once again, the AI gives us a really good set of responses on all this. My friend Tom Redman has put up a wonderful term introduced a couple of years back called hidden data factors. This is the idea that Department A is delivering work products to Department B, and Department B would like to get Department A to change something, but they've finally gotten tired of talking about it and hassling them and said, we'll just make them ourselves. There is a hidden data factory here. While it checks Department A's work, completes Department A's work, then completes Department B's work and delivers it to Department C, which also has the same problem with Department B that Department B has with Department A. And again, sometimes it extends all the way to customers. So these hidden data factories are pervasive in our organization, sapping time and effort, because poor data manifests itself as many different types of organizational challenges. And all of these challenges are viewed through a combination of IT systems and business processes. And we have no real idea until we do the root cause analysis work and connect all the dots that all of these are a single data challenge that is providing, in this case, 7 different symptoms that are showing out there of the problem. Root cause analysis is a key part of data governance in order to look at this. And if you're going to eliminate this data debt, it requires a team of specialized skills that are deployed to create a repeatable process to help develop sustainable organizational skills on this. Our organizational strategy is related to the data strategy, as in what data strategy can do to support the organizational strategy, what data assets support, how can we use those data assets to support the organizational strategy. And that data strategy should be the thing that guides your data governance efforts, what the data assets do to better support strategy and how well is that working are 2 key questions that have to occur from there. And then, of course, we have our utility of the data stewards. These are the folks that help doing this. We have an entire webinar on this that we did back in March, Shannon and I did, in order to do this. The next question that comes up, we should really be expressing this in terms of business goals, and that the language of data governance should be metadata. All of these things are critical, and both of those have to be instantiated in the data stewardship arena. And most importantly, catalog all of this so that, as I said before, document all of this information in a trusted catalog so that somebody else doesn't have to come along in 2 years and reinvent the wheel when you're successful and get promoted to somewhere else. Let's take a look at a more or less typical organization. And again, the somewhat typical challenges that we face. Again, there's a little bit of feedback. There's a little bit of data leadership. They start a data governance practice. It's policy focused, and data improves over time is the promise that is made to the business, but the business perceives this to be a slow moving effort. So the data governance group is also encouraged to do some direct intervention in here as a result of focus. We call these data improvement projects, and things get faster. When they do get faster, we get better feedback, and we can also start to implement what would be considered to be a typical form of data governance with the stewards and the community participants. Where we've gotten good at is making data things happen. And while that's a great thing to celebrate, it doesn't help us in the long run, because we need to make sure that we translate those data things that happen into organizational things that happen. If we don't do that last step in translating, we have the risk of the organization saying, great, you must be done with data governance now. Now, of course, we know data governance is not done. I'll get to that in just a second. This is the scope of stewardship efforts, is everything that's in this picture, including that final leg of making sure we've translated these things all the way to our final result of making sure that data things happen. I like to use the analogy of a firehouse in data governance. Everybody knows that the firemen at the firehouse don't sit around and just play games and things like that. They're much more like a MacGyver approach.
Harmless.
If you're not familiar with MacGyver, you can find him out on YouTube. There's wonderful clips, but he's the guy that can fix anything with duct tape and a paper clip. And data governance is often like that. When the fire department is not fighting fires, they are doing fire prevention. They are urging people to replace their incandescent light bulbs with types of lighting that will be much less likely to cause a house fire in the long run on all this. So governance is important because it costs organization millions each year in productivity, siloed efforts, poorly thought out hardware and software purchases, delayed decision-making, reactive instead of proactive initiatives. And let's not forget, your IT budget is pretty easy to find. You can cut 20 to 40% of it out by doing this. So once again, we ask the question, why is data governance important? Well, again, the AI gives a wonderful, wonderful set of responses out here. The key to thinking about how AI works is to use it as a combination, adjunct, and extension of your own individual and group efforts around this. So that was keeping data governance focused on strategy. It's a young profession. It must directly support organizational strategy by improving data and improving its use in the long and the short term. Second piece here is that data governance must exist at the same level in your organization as HR. It is not a project. Now, we've gotten very good at IT, at creating new activities. Data is not a creation activity, it's an evolution activity. And in order to evolve, it needs to be separated from, made external to, and precede software development or acquisition activities. Data governance programs should be driving IT programs. That's a hard change for organizations to make, but it is a necessary one because we've put two things together that don't quite match up in order to do that. Data governance, again, policy, general direction setting. We might give an example of all information not marked public should be considered confidential, and keep in mind that firehouse metaphor, whereas data management is the business function for planning and controlling and delivering information and data assets, showing how they solve business problems. But the problem really is that external comprehension is always less than we'd like it to be. So we have lots of things that we talk about with data, data management, data governance. And that's what everybody hears. They just don't get it. So don't try to talk to them in too much detail. Talk to them about your data program and make sure that they understand the difference between programs and projects. These are really clear. And from the Project Management Institute's perspective, your data program must last at least as long as your HR program. You will no longer need your data governance initiatives when you close up your doors and go out of business. If you get that in the executives' minds, they will have a much easier time of understanding it, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten asked the question, when are you guys going to be finished with this data governance thing you've been working on? Well, it's not. If you're not familiar with the DAMA DMBOK, it's my fault because as president of DAMA, we're not the most articulate organization, but we're getting better about it. This is our representation of the data world that's out there. You can see there are a series of practice areas that we've put in place. And from a strategy perspective, we have to look at it by saying, okay, so it's really a three-legged stool. We don't want to pick just one of these, but in fact, likely if you're doing something, it's going to involve three of these initiatives. We might start off with the first iteration doing warehousing, quality, and governance, all as one related activity. Because of course, if we're not doing governance and we don't know what we're governing, in this case it's a warehouse, that's going to be a problem. And it's hard to build a good warehouse with poor quality data. Then, however, the next iteration of this might look a little different. We might now say we need to focus in on metadata. That's the data about the data. And notice we're getting more experienced in those areas as well. A third iteration might be required to get it right, where we actually say, yes, the data warehouse will be made easier if we also incorporate the topic of next month's webinar, reference and master data. Notice we've practiced data governance 3 times so far. The real key for this is to understand that from a strategy perspective, we've done things this way historically: strategy, IT projects, and data being the tail wagging the dog. Once again, I'll ask Morgan Freeman to comment on this.
This is wrong.
It's what he says. Yes. Again, when we look at it, the wrong way to think about data strategy is that organizational strategy, IT strategy are followed by data strategy. As I said, that's wrong. The way we want to think about it
This is wrong.
is to go and look at it like this. Data strategy is much more important than your IT strategy. It has a stronger influence on business results. It's not that the two are unrelated, but they certainly shouldn't be uncoordinated, but the data strategy is much more important. And that just means that on this
is wrong.
particular slide, all you have to do is change those 2 pieces around, right? Well, great way to say it. It's a little bit tougher in order to actually make it work. Okay, now, third piece of this, we're going to add ingredients gradually. If you know anything about cooking, you know that this is a really good analogy. Here is a response to the question, create a RACI matrix using data governance roles among business IT users and data stewards. And by golly, the information that we fed in here produced a really useful first draft of a RACI matrix, a responsibility assignment matrix in here that shows how these things work out. Yes, the AI can understand your business, the way you've organized your data governance initiatives, and come up with something that is extremely useful in order to do this. It understands the concept of RACI. It understands how to do a CRUD matrix. There are all sorts of things that you can have it help you out in order to do. I think I forgot to mention this too. Anytime you see this thing up here in the corner blinking, that's a Gemini piece. Like I said, I'm not going to go through each of these in excruciating detail, but just knowing the fact that it can understand these things is a really good way of helping to leverage your individual efforts. If you care, this is the back of my Prius. You can notice it says garbage in, garbage out. Read the license plate. I'm told that there are only 2 of them in the state of Virginia. One of them is mine in order to do this. Why is that important? Well, we have this little thing called digitization that everybody's still trying to work towards. This is what they think the next wave of AI is going to be. And my friend and colleague Mark Johnson was chatting in a Zoom session one day during the pandemic. So you can actually have water cooler chats as you're doing this. And he wrote down, subtract data from digital, and I'm not sure what you get. But if you subtract digital from data, you've still got the data, which I thought was a very profound insight. And it clearly isn't possible to go digital by just spelling data and giving it what we call lip service. You've got to actually have something going on here in order to do this. Those of you that aren't familiar, this is the technology stack meme that is used throughout everything, and all looks great except for the fact that there's this one random process in Nebraska that somebody's been maintaining since 2003 on which the organization depends. So again, it requires a lot more work than just simply spelling the data out in order to do that. And the easiest way to illustrate this is to understand this garbage in, garbage out. If I have the perfect model, if I have a data warehouse, machine learning, business intelligence, blockchain, artificial intelligence, master data management, data governance, analytics. The list is, of course, quite long. And all of these things are usually going on simultaneously until I improve the quality of the data on the left-hand side of this chart. I will continue to get garbage digital results on the right-hand side of the chart on this. One of the first things for you all to look at as a data governance initiative is the size of your cloud bills. Now, cloud was sold to all the executives several years ago as cloud is practically free. Well, if you've ever looked at the size of your cloud bill, it's not even close to being free. And we've caught several of the cloud companies that have actually included in their bills a surcharge that has ranged to as much as 40%, because they say that when you put your data in our cloud, we are both managing and governing your data. Neither of those statements are true, and you should not pay that additional 40%. So a great place to go and make yourself heroically famous by eliminating literally millions of dollars is to look at those cloud bills in detail and find out where you can consolidate some of these data flows in order to have things moving back and forth. Because once again, if I don't have quality data going in, I'm never going to get quality digital results on the outside. The most important part of this is machine learning. Right at the moment, the entire machine learning industry has moved to something from the research perspective called learning algorithms, which means that the algorithms can get smarter, and I'm using that word with air quotes around it, but nevertheless, it's true. The algorithms can get smarter if they have the right data set in order to train them. The problem is, of course, that most organizations have no idea where to go in and find this data that's there to train them. So rather than having your machine learning groups randomly going out and grabbing new data sets and bringing them in and trying to integrate it, have them look at the existing data, the dark data that you already have in your organizations, so that you do not have to have them learning a bunch of new stuff in order to do this. You'll find your machine learning efforts are much more effective in order to do this. Again, I asked Gemini to illustrate the concept of garbage in, garbage out, and it came up with a great example of baking a cake. If you use stale flour, rotten eggs, and incorrect measurements, you will not get a cake that people will ask you for in this. Again, garbage in, garbage out. Perfectly done from the AI perspective. You could give it some of your own organization's information, and it will give you a similarly useful analogy in your response there. This is the location I'm calling you all from today. It's, as I said before, rural Virginia, but I'm showing you this to show you the foundation to the barn that I built. Had built. Should be careful. I had a bank finance the barn, and you might be asking the question, why on earth are you showing me pictures of this? Well, in addition to having the barn built for me, I borrowed money to do it, and the bank gave me exactly this much money and said, you will not go any further until we receive a foundation inspection from the county where you live. It's a good business practice, is it not? And yet there is no IT equivalent for this. So let's talk a little bit about foundations and frameworks. Again, data governance frameworks are a great way to start your process. It's a system of ideas guiding the analysis, organizing project data, and helping you make priorities around this and assessing the progress. For example, you might learn to not put up the walls until the foundation inspection has been passed, but once the walls are up, put the roof on as quickly as possible so that you can work in inclement weather. Again, all of these should be dependent on continued funding. That's a different topic entirely. So in our DIMBOK, we have a context diagram here that shows a data governance framework, one that may or may not be useful to you. I'm going to go through these very quickly because they are something you can get access to. They're on my website. They'll be included in the slides that Shannon will send you later this week. And here's a wonderful one from Gwen Thomas in the Data Governance Institute, one from Rob Seiner for his non-invasive data governance framework. Again, an IBM version here and here in order to look at that. Here's a great one from SAS Institute. This is Baseline Consulting, part of SAS Institute. The American College of Personnel Association includes one in there. Well, these are all important, but they are worth you looking at, and none of them are going to be relevant to you. Probably the best thing to do is to look over them and pick each one individually. As I mentioned before, they're easily accessible on my website, anythingawesome.com, and you'll get a copy of these when Shannon sends you the slides. When you look at this, you're looking at some sort of nice quadrant charts from a leadership perspective. In the upper left-hand quadrant, where the domain expertise is less explicit, but the roles are more formally defined, you have leadership, and they are less likely to encounter governed data directly and have less time dedicated to the process. And the other places you can see the domain expertise is greater, but the roles are less explicitly defined. And then the stewards are going to encounter governed data more directly, as are the subject matter experts. All of these are important because everybody has a role. Most organizations outline the left-hand side of this diagram and say, this is our data governance organization. Again, that is how most do it. It doesn't mean that it's right for your organization. This is something that you are best likely to make that decision on, but that the leadership is responsible in all cases for resources and absorbing some feedback in there, making decisions that are passed on to the stewards. The stewards then are responsible for making sure things happen in the organization, that change occurs in order to do this, that we then get some additional feedback and ideas that go back into this so we can provide guidance for leadership on how well what they did last time worked and what they need to do different next time in order to do this. I would never show them that chart. Here's a simplified version of it, which really talks about what really is going on in our data governance initiatives on this. Similarly, as organizations are getting started, there's a whole laundry list of things that they're supposed to do: content, roadmap, policies and standards, stewards, operational processes, executive mandate. And what I see most organizations doing is spending way too much time and effort doing this. I'm going to go through once again a series of very, very dense, very rapid slides for you to absorb later on that are titled things like goals and principles. Here's a whole bunch of goals and principles that your data governance should be paying attention to. Here are your primary deliverables. Once again, not worth it at this point to go through them, but to look at them later and decide what is appropriate to your organization. What are the roles and responsibilities? We've got suppliers, participants, and consumers that are involved in there. What are the scorecards? How are you going to show data value? Are you going to respond with the number of data decisions or the coverage that is made in there? Do you have checklists that are in place? What are the components of your data governance program in order to do this? And once again, I say, yes, these things are important, but don't spend enormous amounts of time on them. Instead, understand that putting something out in a simple way and evolving it is the best way to do this. What that means here is that you're going to do this set of processes, hopefully exactly once. Again, parenthetical expression, unless you're the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is done it twice already and is now on its third time. And part of the reason they're on their third time is they never got off the dime here. This will occur once, whereas this process that you're doing, governing data, will be the process that you really need to get better at over here on the right-hand side of the diagram. And the older I get, the more all methods end up looking like something that you're probably familiar with already: PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act, the Deming quality cycle, a wonderful way to give guidance to what's happening here. So once again, don't spend too much time on the left-hand side of this diagram because there's no point in it, but instead try to start executing your plan, evaluating the results, revising that plan, and applying change management in order to do this. So I mentioned before that I'm a horse husband. That's where the barn comes from on this. And I hope nobody ever in their life ever writes another data governance charter without first starting with AI. As in, write me please a data governance charter for a small nonprofit that rescues horses. And by golly, it did an absolutely stand-up job. The professional organization that I'm describing here used this as its guidance. It is a great way to do this. Once again, don't pay somebody to sit down and agonize over this. AI is your friend in this instance. Let's take a look at it and see what you can make it work on in order to come up with this. Again, I sound like I'm oversimplifying this, and I'm not saying do it once and never look at it, but by golly, take this and start with this. It will put you light years ahead of what everybody else is doing, and also do a pretty darn good job in order to do this. I've tweaked this slightly by saying, okay, we only wanted to do certain types of horses. It's an all volunteer organization. Now make sure that we actually have the ability to file the requisite tax forms with the local state of Virginia officials in order to do this. And it takes each one of these things and enhances it very, very well. It is a wonderful way to do this. If you don't have an idea, there's plenty of tutorials out there, but the best one is just open up your local Chat GPT or Gemini and ask it to do. This is the prompt. Write a data governance charter for a small nonprofit that rescues horses. And once again, it did a really great job in order to come up with this. I'm sure I'll get some questions there at the end, but it's just too powerful to ignore at this point in time. The last part of this section here is really about data ethics, and we really need to focus on this and make sure that people understand this. If you don't have access to the wonderful book, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill, and you can't get your executives to read it, make them sit down and watch something called Coded Bias, which is on Netflix. So surely you can find a copy of Netflix that you can get your executives to watch. I show this to every one of my students in classes, and their first question to me is, oh my God, do you think my boss understands this? The answer is probably no, but it is something that we should pay attention to. The last part of all of this is data governance in action, storytelling in order to do this. And again, here's two headlines. Pennsylvania Department of Transportation makes millions selling your personal data. Is it safe? Is a headline that occurred, it was a while ago, but nevertheless, it still reoccurs on a regular basis. PennDOT gets caught selling $40 million worth of your data to insurance companies. That sounds like a terrible headline, does it not? Well, the actual headline should have been, PennDOT saves taxpayers $40 million by legally selling data derived from your data. They did it with complete guidance. They had their own data governance program in place, and they did a wonderful job. But if data governance is not out in front of this, they won't know the response on this. How you present this is critically important. Another really bad example here from 2020, Citibank got caught not having good data governance, $400 million penalty for bad data governance controls, bad data governance programs. This is a horrible way of spending money. I can guarantee you if I was a Citibank shareholder, I would be super mad at them for spending this much money going to the treasury instead of spending $400 million better governing my data. As a consumer, let me just add that in there as well. Here's a really interesting one that helps out those of you that are getting into crypto and things like this. So it's a gentleman who decided to sell the original NFT, non-fungible token, from Jack Dorsey here, just setting up his Twitter account, okay? And he thought he was going to get $50 million. He was going to donate half those proceeds to charity in order to do this. And he, instead of getting $48 million, got $280 for this. These are really good stories to tell in the organization as far as data governance. Here's another one. This was a wonderful healthcare organization that I worked for, that everybody in the organization said data, getting access to data around here is like that Catherine Zeta-Jones movie, where she's trying to get through all the various laser beams. Obviously, this is before Tom Cruise. Maybe you want to use a more current piece, but nevertheless, seriously, the management was just amazed that that was how they thought it was that difficult to get access to the data that they were trying to govern. Absolutely incredible. Here's another one. Barclays was buying Lehman Brothers back during the financial pandemic. They put all of their contracts that they were going to buy in an Excel spreadsheet and then hid the ones that they were not going to purchase. So they hid 179 pieces that were in there, handed it to a first-year associate who went home after midnight and reformatted the spreadsheet. They closed the deal, not realizing all 179 contracts that they were not going to purchase were in fact unhidden in the sale, and the government said, tough luck. You have to have all of them in there. If you work at Barclays nowadays, you have very good governance around how to use your spreadsheets because they learned that lesson the hard way. And all you have to do is mention spreadsheets around Barclays and they understand that particular story. Here's another one where in the pandemic, particularly in the early phases of it, the UK health system didn't realize that Excel spreadsheets, they were using an old version, started dropping numbers after the 16,000th row in there. That caused them to severely underestimate how things were moving around all this. So again, just some very quick stories. There's lots and lots more of these. And where can you go to get them? Go to data governance within your Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever your AI du jour is in order to do this, and ask it to give you some questions, some things around that whole process. So let's take a look. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. I started off by describing that data has some very unusual characteristics that have led to a very uneven understanding of this. By the way, you can see me down here in the corner now. I've got my little camera on this, and it's led to some very fractured views of data and increasing amounts of organizational data debt. So to combat this, to give yourself a practical guide, keep data governance focused on strategy. This is a young profession. It must directly support organizational strategy or people will not pay attention to you. And you show how that you're improving data, and not just the data, but also its use, because unfortunately, outside of the data community, most knowledge workers do not know how to use data on this. That two, data governance must exist at the same level as HR. It will be around until your organization decides to close its doors. Very important. In order to achieve effectiveness, data governance is central to data management and central to digitization efforts. It's got to be completely decoupled from IT. I'm sorry, I said completely. It's got to be decoupled from IT strategy, but it has a very, very good role to play in conjunction with this, that you need to start off slowly and add ingredients slowly but surely. A little more salt in the recipe this time, and maybe the next time you're going to add a little bit more of another kind of spice, but you don't add both spices at once because you won't be able to tell which had which effect on the recipe. The frameworks that I went through very briefly are really important for this. Take a look at those frameworks and decide what's useful and what's not useful for you. And then make sure that everybody understands the plan, do, check, act cycle that is in that particular piece. Finally, start and make sure that your organization is quite good at telling stories, especially if they are stories of your own. Again, get out there to ChatGPT and Gemini and ask for questions on your own organization. You'll be amazed at how much it knows about you, what you're doing, what types of things are useful in order to do that. So while we're getting ready for our Q&A session up here, which will start in just a minute, I'll give you a couple quick takeaways in here. And that's very simply, the need for data governance is in fact increasing because the data continues to increase in volume. There's been not much practice improvements in order to do this because it is, relatively speaking, a new discipline, and it's got to conform to the constraints that you place on your organization and that your organization places on you. Each of you has your own individual organization that you need to look after, and that is critical for you to be able to help out in this process. There is no one best way of doing these things. It's got to be driven by these four key elements: focus on strategy, implement as a program and not a project, gradually add ingredients, and learn to do the value of storytelling. How do you improve effectiveness and efficiency over time? The more data literate your organization it is, the easier the transformation is. I don't normally recommend books around data governance, but my colleague John Ladley has done a great job on his version 2. And just a little note on this, version 2 was done 10 years after version 1, and it's a completely different book. So make sure that when you buy John Ladley's book on data governance, that you get the second version, because things have changed that much. I'll be including some other references, websites, and things in here for you all to look at. Of course, my books are on sale at the moment, so I'd love to have you do some of that as well. And we've got the next set of these various topics that are coming up as we go forward with this. And it is top of the hour, time for you guys to ask some really good questions about how we're working on all this. Shannon, back over to you.
Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation. And there's some really great questions already coming in. If you have questions for Peter, feel free to put them in the Q&A panels. We got a half hour for our Q&A session here. And just a reminder to answer the most commonly asked question, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording of this webinar, along with anything else requested. All right, so diving in here, Peter, let's get started with these amazing questions. Is there an intersection between data governance and records management? Should they be governed separately, records versus data?
Wow, great question. Records management predates data management in the sense that records have been around in non-digital form for many, many, many years, longer than digital data management has been. There's an awful lot of overlapping similarities in there, but I would say that records management as a general profession is more mature than the data profession in order to do this. I have some colleagues over at AIM, the Artificial Intelligence Information Management Organization, and one of the things they've said to me on the side is that, well, you guys just kind of come and stole our thunder because digital is a whole lot sexier than records management. Records management is, where are the check stubs? Where are the receipts? Where are the, in fact, records? I will say this. I'm a federal government employee right at the moment, and whenever I go to a server that's got shared devices on it, the root level of the server is devoted to records and non-records. And so the discipline has in fact gotten out throughout the federal government, that they've beat it into their heads over and over again that you need to do this and you need to do it well. So I think that the short answer is that yes, there is some overlaps, and we should continue to learn from those that are in the records management field in here, because there's no point in reinventing the wheels on this, but that it's not top of mind for most data management professionals because we didn't do a good job of acknowledging where we evolved from in order to do that. Great question, though. Thank you for bringing the topic up.
Indeed. So, Peter, what is the difference between data strategy and data management strategy?
I don't see one. I'll go back to John Ladley. Again, a friend who likes to say that the data strategy should be the data portion of the data chapter of the organizational strategy. I think the two of them are the same, but I know that there's some that disagree with me, and I don't think we have achieved a consensus around this. But clearly, if you are an organization operating in the year 2025, data is going to play a larger role than if you were playing around in 1925. Certainly data existed, but not in a digital form. So we hadn't gotten to that level of sophistication. And if you try to make too much of the data strategy, it becomes a burden on the organization, just as that one slide, I think I could show you. Where is that? Oops, sorry, hit the wrong piece here. Let me go back to it. There we go. This slide here, he said stalling for time. If you spend too much time on your data strategy, you're probably spending too much time on the left-hand side of this diagram. And again, what you need to do is look at how you are using data to support the organizational strategy. That is a right-hand side of the diagram activity. And all the planning in the world for it will be useful, but at some point you're going to get to diminishing returns. So keep that in mind, absolutely. Left-hand side, preparation, right-hand side, actually action. Let's focus on the right-hand side there. So data strategy and data management strategy, I think that's splitting hairs and talking about angels dancing on the head of a pin, but I will acknowledge that others disagree with me.
Ooh, I love professional disagreements. But they're interesting.
Shannon likes it when we fight. I should say fight,
well,
disagree.
that's how we learn, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, keeping along kind of that same topic, Peter, with organizational strategy driving data strategy, and then in turn data governance, I'm curious about your earlier comment that data governance should be the same level of HRIT, et cetera. Given organizational strategy routinely change every 3 to 5 years, you don't oftentimes see a direct, immediate, or significant change in day-to-day ops in HRIT due to organizational plan changes. So would you see that as being different for data governance?
So I'm going to make a snide comment just for starters here, and then I'll come back and address it with more seriousness. But the fact that HR strategies and things tend to lag behind organizational strategy is somewhat of a misnomer. And I'm only saying that because my own university went from DEI being absolutely core to the values of everything we do in our organization, as it should be, in January, to all of a sudden in February, we'd never heard of DEI, and they were telling us to ignore those sections of the training pieces because they hadn't had time to rip them out of the training so that we could not get in cross with the Trump administration and lose our access to federal contracts at the university. I think that we're seeing organizations not put up with that kind of a lag in cycles. And so it's a very good question. I think traditionally, many organizations do, in fact, have challenges getting to where they'd like to be in terms of operating on this. But that really, this is the loop that you have to maintain in order to do this. There is an organizational strategy. Again, I'll just use Walmart's everyday low price. So our data strategy should be focused on making sure that we do things with data that result in everyday low prices. Great. So therefore, what should data governance do? Well, they should be looking at what we can, how we can make our data assets better support everyday low price in order to come up with this. And that's really a very critical piece. If we don't get that part right, the rest of this is just sort of tilting at windmills in order to come up with this. So yes, I do think that that is critical. And I think that we're seeing more responsiveness on the part of HR. Once again, just ask where your DEI initiative went if you had one on here. And the question was very, very good. How does that relate to projects versus programs? Programs are things that have, well, let's just do the opposite. Projects have a start and a finish. So if your data governance initiative has a start and a finish, maybe it is a project, but in general, you're probably not, data doesn't tend to be a project-oriented discipline. It tends to be a programmatic discipline, which means it has its own budget, its own cycles, its own measures, its own way of interacting. And that's why I say it needs to be in there and that you need to drive this point home in your organization. We will no longer need our data programs when we no longer need our HR programs. Great question. Thank you.
Indeed, great question. So Peter, as we try to implement more business use cases using AI, some of the AI models require not only to be trained on good quality data, but also trained on bad quality data for the algorithm to discern between the two. Given that how you decide bad data and discard it, bad for one use case may be needed by other use cases.
Absolutely true statement. I'm not sure what you want me to say. Your AI is going to be trainable and more accurate the more it is focused. You may have heard that there's this movement now where we're going to what we call agentic AI. It drives me crazy because all AI is agentic by definition. It's something helping in this category. So once again, it's the hype that the snake oil salesmen are trying to solve people on. Remember what's going on with AI is that venture capitalists of the world have promised their shareholders that there's $2 trillion of value unlockable by these AI improvements in here. And then they're turning around to everybody on this call here and saying, hey, you guys can fix that, right? You can deliver this $2 trillion in value in here. The more narrowly your AI is focused, the more likely it has of being successful. And yet when you start to say, great, I want you to look at my calendar, and then I want you to go look at somebody else's calendar, those are two different things. And now we add a third piece, which is a scheduling algorithm for an airplane flight or something like that. Again, it just gets to be very, very messy very quickly on this. So keep your AI focused. And yes, if you're training the AI with data and trying to say this is good and this is bad, that's absolutely perfect. It doesn't mean that that data is not useful for something else. The question of data viability is the data fit for purpose? And if the bad data is fit for purpose of training your algorithm how to tell that the difference between dogs and wolves is not the existence of snow, that's a real life case study that was up in there, then you definitely don't have a purpose for it. But you also want to make sure that when you have this data that's labeled as poor quality data, that you make sure that it isn't used, in fact, for later purposes in order to do this. It's no accident that the training data set for doing facial recognition was developed by white males. Pale males' skin is the easiest thing that the AI is able to do in terms of facial recognition. So the training data set is directly attributable to the failures of facial recognition software, which results in more people having poor encounters with law enforcement because it incorrectly identifies them. Again, great question. And this gets us back into our ethics topic, which is something that I consider to be part of data governance. By the way, I'll just do one other thing too. There's a lot of people that are saying we need a separate AI governance versus a separate data ethics. I think they are one and the same. I don't think that you should do it. It's like trying to manage information and data separately from each other. I think it's, again, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? If you've got somebody paying attention to ethics, they should be paying attention to data ethics as well as AI ethics simultaneously. Otherwise, you'll end up with fragmented efforts and run the risk of something falling through the cracks. But once again, I acknowledge that is a place where Shannon might achieve some enjoyment from the learning opportunities, right, Shannon?
Indeed. All right, moving on. Although data governance is a continuous journey with long-term benefits, even when quick wins are implemented, it is often deprioritized. And I love this question because we get this a lot. You are not alone in this question. How can we elevate it from a secondary concern to a first-tier strategic priority to decision makers?
Storytelling. Don't want to be glib about this, but when people understand, again, because I've been in this business for 40 years at this point, I can walk into a couple of organizations and I can say, let's start talking about chocolate. And they will go, oh my God, you're not going to tell us this chocolate story again. We're so tired of you telling us that chocolate story. We learned the lessons from the chocolate story. Well, that's great. And they did a wonderful job of that. But here are a bunch of stories that we don't have good responses on in terms of what's actually coming up with these things. So again, look around at your organizations and say, where are the stories that people are already telling? And can we get some lessons from those story tales that will help organizations better understand this? This was another really important one. This is actually, Shannon, they're located near you. Not to tell everybody, not where you are currently, but where you normally are located. But this company, I can walk in there and talk about Catherine Zeta-Jones and everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, which is that it was hard to get data around here. And this is literally the imagery that they used to describe this. And management was horrified to find out on this. So getting those stories in play. I mean, just imagine you're a CEO of a major organization and your people are running around underneath you somewhere talking about, this is how difficult it is for us to get access to data. That's not the picture that you want people to tell. How are we going to change that? Well, in this case, through data governance, as opposed to getting Sean Connery to steal the golden jewels, right? Great question.
So, Peter, there is a bank that wants to start data governance, the business organization leader insists that business has to keep using Excel. Any advice?
I don't think you're ever going to get rid of Excel entirely. But once again, if you can look at the process of how should Excel be used within the organization and try to avoid this large amount of money, it's pretty easy to ask them, do you want to be like Citibank? And again, most people, by the way, I have some people on the inside here who've said that they've spent at least twice this trying to remunerate, and they're not actually making as much progress as they would like to make. So again, a little bit of insider baseball type stories that are there. Yeah, I mean, this is up on the website. You don't have to get these PowerPoint slides from me. The federal government will fine your organization if it has bad data governance programs and internal controls in order to do this. That said, would you rather report to the shareholders that you paid $400 million in a civil penalty, or you put $400 million into managing your data better? I think the choice is quite easy in order to do that. And if that organization has trouble, I'll be glad to come and yell at them, because that's one of the things I get to do, because nobody cares whether you shoot a consultant or not, right? But sometimes they just need to hear it from an outside source. Again, good luck. And, like Shannon said, we all sympathize.
Yep.
And let's do one more thing too on that, Sharon. Sorry. We're headed into a period of economic downturn, and yes, training and data governance initiatives are some of the first things that are on the chopping block. On the other hand, if you can show how they've given you $100 and you've returned to them in a very short order $150, they're probably not going to put you on the first list to be cut. They may in fact say, yes, maybe we should give you more money so that you can save us even more money in the long run. But it's got to be, I hate to say as practical as that, but it doesn't hurt to make sure that they understand that's where the value is. Sure, we could talk about cleaner data and all that sort of thing. What does that really mean? We hold our customers longer. They invest more money with us. Again, taking a banking example further, they were allowed to keep a lower level of returns. That is, by the way, a specific formula in there. If you keep less and you can leverage your data more, that's something that the organization is going to be spending money in order to achieve as a goal.
I'm a firm believer in Excel. I mean, so much so that one of the staff got me a mug that says, "Ooh, this calls for a spreadsheet." I get excited. All right. So, Peter, is a CDO role a must exist for effective data governance for a large size company, or a data governance can be implemented effectively without a CDO role? If not, what is the right way to implement a data governance program?
Yeah, so ideally you have a data leader, and that data leader sits at the table with the other leaders of HR and manufacturing and whatever the other major foci of the board are looking at. But I've seen it very successfully done from the bottom up. A very large bank in the Midwest had a lot of trouble working in one particular area, and they discovered at one point in time that they had 400,000 production access databases. Now just understand the enormity of that. They convinced everybody as a bottom-up effort that it would be a good idea to get rid of them before somebody told them that they had to get rid of them. And they spent 10 years and had a tremendous celebration at the end of the 10-year period in order to come up with that. That was very much a bottom-up effort, and led to additional work in metadata and other things that eventually became their data governance program. In fact, I was talking to some of the folks involved in this 15 years after they started, and they had no idea that the 400,000 production access databases was what in fact caused them to start off on that particular journey. But it is easier, not easy, easier to have a leader at the top doing that sort of work on your own. And if you can start off that way and do it, the challenge with data leadership is really kind of profound though, because who hires that data leader? It's other business executives that don't necessarily know anything about data. So they may look and say, oh, well, you've got a doctorate from Stanford on how to do data mining, therefore you should be our data leader. again, without stereotyping too much, those are some of the most inarticulate people in the world, and you definitely don't want them leading your data organization. They may be great leading a data mining organization or a machine learning exercise, but they're not the people that can sit around the table and talk to the other executives why they should pay attention to data governance, because it'll help make whatever it is they're doing faster, better, cheaper, or less risky. Been doing a lot of work in the neurodivergent area recently, and it turns out organizations are now starting to, some of the consulting companies are advertising that they have people who can do software testing and other types of activities that are on the scale, and that those people are actually producing, they work faster, they find more errors, they do a great job around this. And so there's a sense that perhaps there is a really good play in that area of trying to find people who can do that, but they're probably not the people who are going to sit around the table with the rest of the executives and do this. Not to say that they can't grow into the roles, but they're certainly usually not ready as they come out of the laboratory environments on that. Boy, we covered a lot of topics on that one, Shannon. I got to watch it. I'll put my foot in my mouth pretty quick. Again, great question, though.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of great questions coming in. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to slip in as many as I can here. So, Peter, how do we navigate a culture of doing things one way for a long time, which has brought the business success, when the data strategy calls for a mindset shift in doing things differently? This is my uphill battle.
It is a challenging battle in order to come up with that. And once again, culture eats strategy for breakfast is the famous old Peter Deming. No, actually, I think that was somebody else that said it. But anyway, actually, it's on one of the slides. But go back and get the quote from it. The challenge is, of course, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that what got you where you are is not necessarily what you're going to need to have to go into the new environment. Remember, at one point in time, automatic teller machines were supposed to replace all customer interaction with banks, and they were going to be completely not having to have anything called tellers in there. Self-driving cars is what Uber and Lyft are trying to get to, and even Waymo is still having trouble with them as far as getting that to work. Not that the Waymos don't work well, but they're still confined to the back roads. They're not allowed on highways at the moment. If you're going to get to the airport and back, you're probably going to take a highway at some point in order to get there. So it is a tough challenge, and luckily there is a professional called change management professionals that we work with. In fact, Mark's spouse, what's her name, Shannon, that gave a great talk she and Mark did at EDW this last time through on change management.
Sarah.
What her name is.
Yeah.
Sarah, yes, that's right. Sarah did it. So there are there are change management professionals here, and it's not, we don't expect you as data governance professionals to have that, but we do expect you to know that they exist. I can tell you that the Department of Defense had change management professionals that I could draw upon back when I was the reverse engineering program manager for the entire Defense Department, and in fact had access to these change management professionals that I could simply ask them to come in and help work out and be part of the team. And they did a great job, because gosh, if there's one organization that likes tradition, it's the US military. Again, catch me offline. I'll tell you some stories on that one. Sorry, shut up, Shannon, so we can get to the next question, but a great one, really great question.
Oh yeah, so many great questions. I don't think we'll have enough time, but again, I'm going to try and get through as many as possible here. So Peter, I appreciate your perspective on how data modeling's metadata impacts actual data quality and governance outcomes. Since enterprise architecture emphasizes integrated approaches over siloed handoffs, what would you recommend as the optimal transition point where analysts pass their conceptual logical designs to DBAs, database administrators, for implementation? What strategies have you found effective for minimizing translation losses during this handoff while maintaining governance continuity from conceptualization through implementation?
And here's your blue book and a pencil, and you have 2 hours. Write your answer out in longhand, right? That's a great question. Let me see if I can do any of it justice. I think that the key to determining that is to make sure that everybody is literally speaking the same language, so that those efforts can be facilitated by making sure that everybody understands all of the terminology that's involved and the subject materials. And the best way to do that is to adopt a form of, and I hate to say that, we need to have agile in everything that we do, because it's not really true. But in this particular instance, having very close link in there between what's going on with the customers and what's going on from the business perspectives and other things that are related to that is the easiest way of making sure there is less friction in order to do that. It's absolutely a non-trivial task. And if you have things that are well organized, it's easier to come up with that common vocabulary. But in many organizations, we have the physical implementation people who a lot of the business owners know they can run over to them and say, hey, just make this little change. We don't have to make sure it goes through any configuration management in order to do this, because I just need this to make sure that the reports will run on Friday. And that is a culture shift. And many organizations have challenged and have run into some challenges in that area. Again, really good question. If you want to pick that up offline, I'll be happy to schedule a time with you. You can just ping me on the website and we can chat over it on a cup of coffee or catch me at a conference.
Perfect. So we've got about 5 minutes left, so I think we can get at least one more in. So Peter, how would you position data lineage within the data governance framework?
I don't know that you're going to see lineage showing up as a part of data governance framework. It absolutely is critical. Several types of industries are looking right now, for example, at where their sourcing comes in, because there's all of a sudden these funny tariffs that are there, and they're not sure what the effect and impact is going to be. I think that this is really illustrating the point that I made earlier, which is that there are a lot of data governance frameworks that are out there and possibly useful to you, but that the only real way that you're going to be able to make them useful is to look at the existing frameworks. And again, I'll just flip through them here real quickly. These are just some of the ones that are out there. They're all on my website, so you can definitely get to them and look at them and say, hey, we're missing something, right? We should have something that's there. And gosh, I like this one, but it doesn't have anything in there on data lineage in there, and then add your own piece in there. And that's a good reason to say why you don't adopt these things whole cloth and why you're be able to add value in there, because lineage is particularly important to the business flows that are working within your organization. Again, great question. That's why we do this, right,
Add more
Shannon?
questions. It is why we do this. Absolutely. So Peter, in the RACI, why A for metadata management is in data storage and R for IT?
Wow. So a very specific question on the RACI that I showed. I'm not even sure I can get to it in time to figure out. Let's see if I can find it here real quick. Where is that RACI?
Peter's an amazing speaker. I've seen him present 120 some odd slides in an hour.
We did 146 today, Shannon.
I think your record's like 160.
Pretty. And again, I apologize. You guys can, of course, this will be on YouTube, so you can slow it down and watch it in more detail, and you'll have the slides with you. Okay, so read me the question again, if you would, Shannon. On the RACI
Absolutely.
matrix.
Yeah. So why in the RACI? Why A for metadata management is in data storage and R for IT?
Okay, so you can see I've got that right here. This was a RACI for a particular instance where we were working with a group that was trying to migrate off of spreadsheets to data management practices, to relate it back to a further question that's in there. This worked for this organization. This is not normative, and it's not what should work for your organization. So very critical for you to not look at this and say, oh, the AI said this is done. This was done based on a bunch of process engineering that we were doing in this particular organization in here, and trying to help them wean them, if you will, off of spreadsheets, very much as the other questioner had asked this question. So in this case, that's why the R was in here, because we're doing the as is in here. It was definitely not the to be, and definitely not something that you should use as prescriptive. All of the examples in here that I've given you from the AI perspective are not for you. They are examples that worked well for this particular organization that was given to them, and they're able to use it, but very definitely not the ones that you guys should use. So again, great question. Hope that makes sense.
So many great questions, but I'm afraid that is all the time that we have for this webinar. Thank you, Peter, again, so much for another great presentation. Thanks to all of our attendees who are so engaged in everything we do. Again, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording. Thank you all. Hope to see you next month.
Thank you, Shannon. A pleasure as always.
Cheers.